Hi, this is Heather Trim, Executive Director of Zero Waste Washington. The following video is an edited version of the bulk milk presentation we delivered on January 26, 2026. Our bulk milk project was funded by a King County RE Plus Circular Economy Grant, along with generous donations of time by Northwest Food Alliance, Illumina Consulting, and Zero Waste Washington. First, a bit of background about the project. For the past several years, Zero Waste Washington convened the Washington Workgroup on Sustainable School Cafeterias. This group of folks from across the state explored ways to reduce waste in schools and shift towards composting and more sustainable systems. School cafeterias are one of the largest sources of waste generated on campuses, and milk cartons make up a significant portion of that waste. Because milk cartons are not recyclable in our local recycling systems, our goal was to eliminate milk cartons from school cafeterias. The project officially launched in October 2024, but we experienced a brief delay in getting the contract in place, so our work in the schools began in earnest in March 2025, and the funding for the project concluded on December 31st, 2025. We're hopeful that this work will continue in various forms in the future and that this will serve as a model for others. Overall, this was a wonderful project with lots of lessons learned and lots of opportunity for others to build upon. Now I'd like to introduce the team and hand things off. We're joined by Chef Tom French, a well-known chef and innovator in the space, Stephanie Lekovin, a registered dietitian who's been working with schools on sustainability for about 15 years, and Clarissa Phillips, who is our data guru and evaluation expert from Illumina Consulting.
Hi, I'm Steph Lakoven. Before we dive in, I think a bit more background would be helpful. Our original vision was a truly circular system with no waste, where local dairies would fill reusable stainless steel canisters with fresh milk, deliver them to schools, and then take the empty canisters back for cleaning, sanitizing, and refilling. Within the first few months, we learned that infrastructure isn't yet set up to support this level of change. While that closed-loop system isn't feasible right now, we hope to see it implemented in the future. It's also important to ground this work in context. The lunchroom is a place that all students visit for just 30 minutes every day, not realizing that in such a short period of time, many different systems intersect with the goal of feeding them. We'll highlight what this means for students, teachers, custodial and maintenance staff, school administrators, and nutrition services teams, and why any change has to work for all of them. This slide outlines our pathway to change. We'll start with the discovery phase, move into implementation, then cover data collection and evaluation. Finally, we'll talk about what's next and key elements for making a project like this sustainable in your own school. At the end of each section, we'll share photos from the project. These photos show us conducting a waste audit with students at a school in Federal Way. In this photo, Clarissa is working online with students on data collection and evaluation. And here, I'm presenting to students about how to conduct a waste audit. I'll hand it off to Tom now.
Hey, thanks, Steph. So we actually broke this project into 3 different phases. One was the discovery phase, 2 was implementation phase, and 3 was the findings stage. So here we are in the discovery phase, and because of our truncated timeline, we found it necessary to move very, very quickly. So what you're going to see in the next few slides is what we call the pivot. And as Stefan mentioned, the original concept of the project was to approach it from a micro level of working with local dairies. But as we got into the supply chain for milk and particularly for equipment, because we were really caught up in all the tariff chaos, we realized that we needed to pivot and make a more global, interconnected approach. So we started looking outside the region for equipment and supplies, going directly to manufacturers, and figuring out what might actually be possible. The milk bags are a perfect way to illustrate the pivot. In our initial research, we learned that the primary reason many schools stopped offering bulk milk was due to L&I claims related to repetitive and overhead lifting of the 5-gallon bags. Our first idea was to move towards the 2.5 gallons to lighten the load. However, we found that the 5 gallons were more readily available and the 2.5 gallon bags were not quite as available and required a lot more lead time on ordering. Also, if you're using the 2.5 gallon bags, you would need to change those units twice as often as you would with the larger bags. So we pivoted back to the 5 gallon units and focused on solving the lifting issue. We were able to find a very small micro hydraulic lift, which could easily be maneuvered in and out of the walk-in, through the kitchen, and through the lunchroom to load the 5 gallon units. This allowed for a more ergonomically friendly pattern to emerge. We also learned that readiness is a core component for a successful project, meaning that this requires buy-in by multiple stakeholders within your school community. Buy-in from one stakeholder alone that's enthusiastic about the project really isn't enough. You need more widespread participation, and we'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. But it was important initially to have transparent conversations with the dairy distributors to discuss pricing, ordering, and delivery schedules. But I think the most robust, however unintended consequence that helped to move this project forward was the student response and engagement. And for me, this was the most fascinating part of the entire project, was seeing how interested students were in being active participants and learning as we went. They took part in waste audits, helped us sort waste, and really shared responsibility for making the system work. Much of our early work focused on flow, the flow of students through the lunch line, the flow of cups from start to finish, and the flow of waste at the end of service. We were also able to build strong direct relationships with manufacturers, which turned out to be really critical, and a significant amount of time spent on readiness and preparation to ensure school staff felt supported through the process. It was important to us that they understood that this was a collaboration and that they were actually part of the process. And while we brought expertise and resources, we needed their engagement to help identify practical solutions. We had to be clear about the overall benefit, both to the district and especially to students, and how the project could create meaningful opportunities for student engagement. But honestly, for this to work, you really do need your full matrix of stakeholders at the table. You just can't buy a piece of equipment and some cups and expect to cultivate real change. So this diagram illustrates the stakeholder matrix. And basically, if you're even one of these is missing, you're going to hit a roadblock fairly early on. And that meant getting buy-in and participation from principals, district leadership, finance and administrative staff, nutrition services director, kitchen staff, custodial, maintenance teams, waste haulers, teachers, students, and milk distributors. I think one of the biggest takeaways from the discovery phase is that you're doing all that front-end work, bringing stakeholders together and helping everyone understand the value of the project and how all the systems connect is critical to success. So once your stakeholders on board, where do you begin? Our approach was to start with the staff and build trust. We spent a lot of time in the kitchens listening to concerns and feedback, and then designed training that directly addressed the challenges and opportunities that the staff had identified. One recurring major concern was workflow. I think there was an initial assumption that bulk milk would slow down service and cut into students' seated lunchtime. So to address that, several schools that we worked with actually split the serving line. So instead of having one two-sided line, we added another salad bar or other equipment that allowed them to split their line into 4, which meant students moved through much faster. At some schools, especially at elementary schools, students are now actually getting through the line in about half the time. Another critical piece was being present during implementation, providing on-site support, collecting survey feedback, and making rapid adjustments. In some cases, we were able to pivot the very next day to improve economics or reduce lifting, or to limit the behind-the-scenes workload. That meant assessing existing equipment and traffic flow, and then reconfiguring the setup so that milk wasn't the bottleneck in the line. And while that sounds simple, it actually took 3 or 4 attempts to get the configuration right. But across the board, that level of support and engagement made staff much more willing to try new approaches and make changes. And this is where the safety, labor, and supply chain considerations really begin to intersect. On this slide, you'll see two different styles of units. I will say that one that's not displayed, which we explored additionally, was a Silver King models, but we moved on from that because it required a two-handed operation, meaning you have to actually put your tray down, put your cup under the dispenser, and then use your other hand to push the, for lack of a better term, the pedal that actually allows the milk to flow. So we moved on very quickly to the Hubert unit, which is what you see on the right-hand side. That's a push and play system that allows for one-handed operation. So you literally just put the cup up against the unit and push, and the milk dispenses. But ultimately, we landed on the Utterly unit, which is shown on the left-hand side as our long-term solution. The Utterly unit features under-counter pull-out refrigeration, so you can see the drawers with the pull-out handles. All of the refrigeration and all the cooling happens below the work surface. The tabletop model provides enough space for racks of cups on both sides. And the top dispenser uses a push-to-pour system that automatically dispenses an 8-ounce serving once you push the button. It also has an automatic shut-off, so meaning that if the unit goes outside of the safe temperature range, it actually stops dispensing. It also uses standard refrigeration compressors, which is you'll see on the left-hand side of the open door, which is very familiar and easy for maintenance teams to service. This particular design also eliminates the need for the hydraulic lift, the need for a separate slide tray table, but I think even more importantly is it's just ergonomically designed for loading milk. So each bag holds 5 gallons and the system can hold multiple bags up to 25 gallons total. So as one bag empties, the system automatically switches to the next bag, allowing for continuous service. So one option is adding a hydraulic lift. As you can see on this slide, it takes up minimal space and it's super ergonomic. The lift raises the milk to a height where staff can slide the container directly into place instead of lifting it manually. Now let's talk a little bit about workflow, because this is where we were really able to reduce staff time and effort. What we heard consistently was that this might be a bit more work, or as many people said, it's just different work. So we focused on making it as simple as possible. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see stainless steel cups stored in metal racks. So we transitioned to the blue rack shown on the right side for two reasons. One is that they actually hold 36 cups, which increases capacity, but it also becomes the single container used throughout the entire process. So students take a cup directly from the rack, fill it at the milk dispenser, and when they're done with their meal, they go to the waste station, even though we found there's very little milk actually being wasted, and they place the cup upside down into the same style of rack. That rack then goes straight into the dish machine, comes out clean, moves to the drying racks, and then returns directly clean to the serving line. With that one change, we eliminated multiple handling steps for staff, and that small workflow adjustment made a big difference, improving efficiency and significantly reducing repetitive handling.
The layout of waste stations plays a huge role in helping students dispose of items correctly. In some schools, we observed 6 or more trash cans spread around the lunchroom where students were throwing everything: trash, recyclables, compostables, including food, all headed for the landfill. Many of those schools added compost bins for the first time while we were there. We recommended simplifying the setup by reducing the number of waste stations to 1, 2, or 3, depending on the size of the lunchroom and the number of students. We also suggested removing recycling bins from the main disposal line. In many cases, nothing being served was actually recyclable, and the recycling streams were too contaminated to be recycled anyway. Instead, we recommended placing 1 or 2 clearly marked recycling bins in a visible corner, separate from the main stations, so students could still recycle a bottle or can if they brought one from home. Although composting wasn't the primary focus of our work, conducting a waste station assessment was still helpful. When the disposal process is clear and well designed, students are far less likely to throw durable cups and trays into the trash or compost. At one elementary school in Federal Way, a family liaison created some terrific small signs that attached directly to the bins. We also developed additional signage for cups, liquids, and trays using small, easy to attach holders positioned at eye level for students. These could be rotated as needed. For milk disposal specifically, we designed the flow so students pour out any remaining milk and then place their cup upside down into a dishwasher rack. It's important that cups are not stacked, otherwise they're difficult to separate during washing. We used green rolling utility carts from Uline to collect cups, trays, and any extra milk. The system proved highly efficient. Staff simply roll the cart back into the kitchen and transfer the rack of cups directly into the dish machine. It's also important for school administrators and staff to actively teach students how the system works and where everything should go. One school created a short instructional video, another held an assembly, and others incorporated education into classrooms or lunchtime announcements. Student green teams were helpful with supervising waste sorting during lunch, transporting the carts between lunch periods, and especially with creating signage. The key lessons here are the importance of comprehensive mandatory staff training, identifying and addressing staff needs in real time, being willing to pivot quickly, and observing, together with staff, what's working and what isn't, then adjusting accordingly. The image on the top left shows Tom conducting a training with staff. I want to emphasize how valuable that collaborative approach was. The staff do this work every day. They have the practical expertise, and our role was to incorporate their feedback and adjust the plan as needed. In the image on the bottom right, we highlight a few food service employees who were especially enthusiastic and highly engaged in the feedback process with us. Here you can see an example of a school where we split the serving line. There's now a line on both the left and the right, effectively creating 4 sides instead of 2, which helps move students through more quickly. That approach has both benefits and trade-offs. At one elementary school, the new setup actually resulted in students getting through the line so efficiently that they ended up with extra time during their 20-minute seated lunch, which the school is now figuring out how best to use.
Hi, my name is Clarissa Phillips, and now we're going to talk about the data. In this project, we looked at several different types of data, and we'll share some of those key findings with you today. Some of this data is still preliminary. We haven't completed data collection yet, and analysis is ongoing, but it already gives us useful insights. Overall, we collected 5 different types of data as part of this project. This included conducting waste audits, pulling data directly from participating school districts, implementing surveys with staff who were involved in the rollout, and conducting interviews with implementing staff. We also analyzed internal project data, things like attendance tracking, records, and purchasing data. On the right, you'll see an example snippet from one of the spreadsheets we sent to the districts. We asked for a high level of detail so that we could really parse the data and better understand what was happening on the ground. When we first started this project, we thought we would rely fairly heavily on waste audit data. Our original vision was to conduct waste audits before implementation and then again afterward, and to do a direct comparison, looking at things like the number of cartons we were seeing before and after. Ultimately, we decided to pivot. Instead, we leaned more heavily on district-level data estimates along with qualitative data. The reason for that is that the waste audit data is really just a snapshot. It captures a very specific moment in time, and it can be heavily influenced by outside factors, field trips, special events, schedule changes, and other things happening at the school. District data gave us a little less precision, but it provided a much stronger big picture view. That's ultimately where we landed, using estimates directly from districts as our primary data source. That said, I want to be very clear, waste audits absolutely have their place. They're a great tool for raising awareness at schools. They're helpful for understanding how systems are currently functioning, where contamination is happening, and how much milk is actually being wasted in cartons. They're just less useful for large-scale, long-term comparisons. One really important thing that came out of the waste audits we did conduct was an issue that wasn't even on our radar at the beginning of the project: juice boxes. What we found is that juice boxes are actually used more frequently than milk cartons in some schools. On top of that, we started referring to them as the trifecta of waste. There's the carton, the straw, and the little plastic wrapper that the straw comes in. Those wrappers get stuck to everything, which leads to widespread contamination in compost streams. This was a really significant finding. It wasn't something we were able to address within the scope of this project, but it's absolutely something on the horizon for future work. And without doing those waste audits, we wouldn't have identified it as an issue at all. I do want to clarify, juice usage varies by district. Not every district goes through large volumes of juice. In some cases, if the juice is 100% juice and counts as a fruit, it may be one of the last items students are allowed to grab on their way out, which contributes to higher usage in certain schools. As Tom mentioned earlier, we worked hard to engage students throughout the entire process, including in data collection. One of the schools was especially proactive about involving students at every stage, and we ended up hosting a virtual data workshop with them. During that workshop, I introduced students to different types of data, quantitative versus qualitative, how to collect data, how to maintain data quality, and how measurement choices matter. We talked about units of measurement, consistency, and accuracy. The students practiced with small activities, and it was honestly a lot of fun to work with them. I also want to highlight that this project integrates directly into what students are already learning in school. They're using math skills and critical thinking to work on a real-world problem that affects them in their own lunchroom. That kind of applied learning is incredibly powerful. Students also help directly with the waste audits themselves. On the right, you can see a student measuring leftover milk. That hands-on, tactile engagement was really important for building understanding and ownership. Now I'll give a quick overview of the implementation. We implemented bulk milk in Federal Way, Tukwila, and Renton. In Federal Way, we completed implementation at 4 schools, although we had originally planned for 5. One school ended up not moving forward at the last minute, but everything is now in place for that 5th school, and we anticipate implementation happening very soon. We implemented in 1 school in Tukwila and 1 school in Renton. And as a related component of the project, we also installed water refill stations at several schools across a few different districts. In total, that's 7 schools across 3 districts for bulk milk. For water refill stations, we worked with 4 districts and installed 6 stations across 5 schools. 1 school received 2 stations. What I really want to emphasize on this slide is that this project cannot be implemented in a silo. It simply doesn't work that way. Throughout the project, we tracked the different organizations and agencies we interacted with, and in total, we worked with 56 different entities. That included businesses across the supply chain, multiple school districts, government agencies, and community organizations. It was a highly collaborative effort from start to finish. Okay, now let's talk about the surveys. We did implement staff surveys, but timing was a challenge. Our plan was to distribute surveys 6 to 8 weeks after implementation. However, about half of the schools implemented the project during the final 8 weeks of the grant period, which meant we didn't have enough time to collect surveys from all sites. In total, we received 9 survey responses. That's too small of a sample for robust statistical analysis. We can't reliably calculate percentages or break responses down by staff role. With that caveat in mind, we still found some useful insights. Surveys were distributed specifically to staff who were directly involved in implementation. We asked how startup felt initially and then how things were going at the time of the survey. You can see from the first two bars that opinions on startup were mixed, which is okay. But 8 weeks later, everyone agreed that things were going smoothly, which is a really positive finding. We also asked about spills, since that was a known concern. There was a slight shift over time. Spills became less of an issue, though some staff still felt they were a problem. That's important to know going in. We asked whether bulk milk created more work for staff or increased staff time. With a small sample size, it's hard to draw strong conclusions, but a few respondents did feel it still required more work. Keep that in mind as we move to the next slide. Despite those concerns, when we asked staff how likely they were to recommend bulk milk to other schools on a scale from 1 to 10, the average score was an 8.3. That's very high. So even with some added work and occasional spills, staff still felt the benefits outweighed the challenges and would recommend bulk milk to others. We also included open-ended survey questions. Several strong themes emerged. Staff noted benefits for students and the broader community. Students reported that the milk tasted better and was colder. Staff appreciated the reduction in solid waste and milk waste, and several mentioned environmental benefits. One respondent noted potential health benefits, and many appreciated that the system is relatively simple. It's quick to learn, and students adapted easily. At the same time, respondents acknowledged some challenges. There's more mess, more spills, additional dishwashing time, and some startup hurdles. Several noted that without external support, starting a program like this would be difficult due to cost and logistics. There were also mixed opinions about student enthusiasm. Some staff felt students really loved it, while others felt students were largely indifferent. That variation was interesting to see. In addition to the surveys, we conducted 5 interviews. Several consistent themes came up. Adaptability was key. Staff needed to be flexible and able to adjust based on space, staffing, and daily realities. Clear, consistent communication was also critical. Everyone involved needed to stay connected, informed, and collaborative. Another major theme was that milk acts as a gateway project. It opens the door to conversations about food systems, supply chains, where our food comes from, environmental impacts, and even climate change. It creates opportunities for future projects and deeper learning. Support is crucial. Whether that support comes from district staff or external partners, having people available to troubleshoot and problem solve makes a big difference. Finally, staff consistently noted that students learn quickly. They're curious, engaged, and excited by projects like this, which creates powerful learning opportunities. Overall, everyone we interviewed recommended bulk milk for other schools. They were enthusiastic about the project and shared overwhelmingly positive feedback. And I think the quote on the right really captures the potential scale of the impact. This underscores that this project is so much bigger than just, oh wow, now we have reusable cups at school. What it actually does is create awareness. You suddenly have a whole group of students who are more conscious of what's happening in the environment, and that kind of awareness can have a huge long-term impact. These are some key quotes from the interviews that we felt really captured our major findings, so I'd like to give you a moment to read through them. As Tom mentioned earlier, one staff member shared that it's not necessarily more work, it's different work. Figuring out how that fits into existing workflows is really important. I also really love the quote on the top left about the matrix of stakeholders. Having nutrition staff, custodial staff, and a principal who are all on board, solution-oriented, and open-minded is absolutely critical to success. Okay, now let's talk about big picture data. Before we dive into the numbers, I want to go over a few important caveats. We received data from 2 of the 3 districts, and we're still working on getting data from the 3rd. The data we're looking at today is primarily from the 2024-2025 school year. There are some limitations and assumptions built into this data, and it's important to understand those so we don't misinterpret the results. First of all, we know there are other changes happening at the same time. For example, Federal Way transitioned to serving only plain milk this year, rather than offering both plain and chocolate milk. That change alone can impact waste numbers. We also know that given the current legislative landscape, many schools are placing increased emphasis on composting, which also affects disposal data. Some of the data we're using are district estimates, and enrollment numbers can change from year to year as well. And finally, it's important to be clear about the scope of impact for this project. Bulk milk is currently served only at lunch, not at breakfast. That's where we expect to see the primary impact. Non-dairy milk is also still served in cartons and is not part of the bulk milk system at this time. So with that context, here's a snapshot of a few key data points. During the 2024-2025 school year, Federal Way Public Schools distributed about 200,000 milk cartons. Renton distributed about 50,000. We're still waiting on data from Tukwila, so that's not reflected here yet. Of the 200,000 cartons in Federal Way, about 135,000, or 67%, were distributed at lunch. That figure excludes non-dairy milk. In Renton, the percentage was slightly higher, with about 69% of dairy milk cartons distributed at lunch. If we look at the weight of those cartons, an empty milk carton weighs between 0.3 and 0.43 ounces. When you add that up, it equates to roughly 3,600 pounds of solid waste in Federal Way and about 930 pounds in Renton, just from the cartons alone. And I want to emphasize that this does not include the weight of leftover milk. When students throw away cartons that are half full, that additional weight isn't captured in these numbers. The small table on the right highlights future opportunities. In Federal Way, we were able to get data on juice cartons. At lunch, about 135,000 milk cartons were distributed, compared to 242,000 juice cartons. If there were a future opportunity to explore something like bulk juice, the potential waste reduction could be even greater. That's definitely a project for another day, but it's worth keeping in mind. The previous slide looked at 2024-2025 data overall, showing the potential future impact. One school provided specific comparison data on garbage weight and waste disposal costs. They implemented bulk milk in September, and they were able to pull exact data comparing 2024 and 2025 numbers from September, October, and November. You can see the reductions they experienced month by month at that single school. Again, we know there are other contributing factors like increased composting, but the differences are still really striking. And when you think about scaling that across an entire district, the impact becomes significant. This is also a great example of the value of using actual data to make direct comparisons rather than relying only on estimates. Given the time frame of this grant, estimates were the best approach for capturing the overall picture. But moving forward, it would be really interesting for schools or districts to do a retrospective analysis, pulling monthly data year over year to see what the real differences look like. One final note on pricing for the 2025-2026 school year. In this particular district, a serving of milk in a carton costs 31 cents. When you break down a 5-gallon bag of bulk milk by servings, it comes out to about 29 cents per serving. So it's comparable, and in this case, slightly cheaper. So to summarize the data, there are still some spills, and there may be some additional work involved. Despite that, the majority of staff involved recommend not only continuing bulk milk where it's been implemented, but expanding it to other schools. There are clear opportunities for waste reduction. Schools have the potential to reduce milk cartons by 2/3 or more, depending on how implementation is structured. There's also strong potential to reduce waste disposal costs, though that will vary depending on how garbage service is charged, whether by weight or pickup frequency. We also know there's additional waste reduction happening from the project that we haven't quantified here, including reductions in milk waste and improvements in composting. One of the most important findings from the surveys, interviews, and staff interactions is the high impact value of this project for future opportunities. This project itself makes a difference, but the real value lies in what happens next. If you can create a culture shift, increase awareness, and use projects like this as gateways to learning, the potential for future impact on things like juice cartons and other waste streams is significant. So the key takeaways for anyone considering implementation are these. Bulk milk is a gateway to learning. It's crucial to address the details, the workflow, the logistics, the day-to-day operations, while also keeping the bigger systems picture in mind. Transparent, relevant, and timely communication is vital. Success depends on everyone approaching the project with a solution-oriented mindset, staff, students, and partners alike. If adjustments are needed, you pivot and keep moving forward. And finally, we'll share a few more photos. The next pictures show Tom presenting to students. Tom, I'll hand it over to you here. These are great examples of gateway learning moments.
Thanks, Clarissa. That's super helpful information. While the bulk milk project funding focused on logistics, practicalities, costs, supply chain, etc., it became apparent really quickly that the student engagement and learning opportunities was an area of tons of potential. So Northwest Food Alliance, in collaboration with Technology Access Foundation, continues to fund exploration around learning modules. And we've actually already developed and piloted learning modules for math, science, health, garden to table, and humanities, with more to come soon, which again emphasizes where the real opportunities are to create a culture change, both from a practical standpoint, like the diversion of cartons from landfill, but more importantly, to leverage the food ecosystem as a teachable moment across multiple learning platforms. If we want to see real impact, we need to bring this type of opportunity forward, and much more quickly. I think what's been really powerful is that around the centerpiece of the bulk milk, all of these other constellations of learning and interest and awareness began to emerge. These were unintended consequences, meaning we didn't go into this expecting that the type of circular integration, but it became very clear that meaningful change was actually occurring at the school. This shows a group of sixth grade students in a health sciences class. In early February, we planned and served a sit-down brunch for 150 students and their invited guests, including food service staff from the kitchen. Students participated in menu planning with a focus on foods that reflect healthy choice and are directly linked to chronic health issues such as inflammation, diabetes, heart, and circulatory issues. Students carried the project across the finish line by educating the adults that were at their table and sharing what they learned, but also talking about the project origin, including the shift to durable serviceware and why that was done, as well as the overall impact of implementing compost and raising awareness and understanding what the waste stream is and how it affects us in our communities. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what lasts beyond the pilot and the lessons that we've learned. So there are basically three key takeaways. First, readiness is essential. That's true for staff, but it's also true for the broader school community. This is actually a culture shift and one that we all know needs to happen. The question is, how do we make this part of what we're teaching? So the easiest, most practical way to do that is through the food and beverages that students interact with every day. Second, everything we did was evaluated through the lens of scalability and manageability. How would this continue? How does it grow? How do we streamline processes? How do we reduce costs? And how do we make on-site training less intensive while still being effective? So these ideas connect directly to the core components of implementation. Pre-qualifying schools is critical. We don't want to discover a month into the project that the principal wasn't engaged. So that matrix of stakeholders needs to be aligned from the beginning, and staff need to be prepared for adaptable systems. In some cases, changes happen literally overnight. The implementation phase included infrastructure assessment, identifying needs, ordering and qualifying equipment, and making sure it performed as intended. We conducted and required on-site training, worked through milk ordering protocols, and coordinated closely with dairy providers as well. Workflow assessment and adaptation were also key. We provided on-site support during implementation, typically 2 to 3 days per school, with follow-up visits as needed. And we're still doing follow-up visits to make sure that staff feel supported and confident. Ongoing support has been essential. That includes troubleshooting, returning to sites after implementation, and even adjusting systems when schools develop better ideas than what we initially proposed. And actually, in one case, we were able to implement an improvement immediately because we were still engaged. We also provided supplemental training and encouragement. And to Clarissa's point earlier, no matter where you work in the food industry, if you're serving thousands of meals, there's going to be accidents and spillage. That's just part of the reality. So what we've seen is that while spills do happen, they're not major, and student engagement becomes the critical factor for long-term success. One of my absolute favorite quotes from a teacher has been that this has gone from a pilot to a project to a movement. And that's truly how we see this. This work is about much more than equipment. We know that staff buy-in and ongoing support are critical, and implementation cannot happen in a silo. Context does matter. So let's dive into some of the details. The true cost of implementation, the staff requirements, and the level of external support that's needed. One of our key conclusions is if this is treated as a cost-only decision, it will fall short every time. So it actually requires a more comprehensive approach. We've looked at several implementation models and cost structures. One option that we landed on is the Hubert system, which includes the trays, the slide tray tables, the units themselves, and the hydraulic lifts. This can be a good fit for some districts depending on the size and the layout. But at the end of the day, I actually see the Utterly unit as an ideal solution, simplifying and streamlining the milk dispensing process, saving time and effort. And while it can be slightly more expensive up front, I would rather help your district figure out how to raise that funding rather than create a system that's more complex and harder to implement. And I do want to be very clear, neither Northwest Food Alliance nor Zero Waste Washington benefit financially from any of these equipment choices. So our recommendations are based solely on professional experience. We strongly encourage districts to take advantage of follow-up opportunities with us. We are offering free virtual assessments to walk through the different models we've seen, explain what we recommend, why, and what the true costs are. And in our final report, you'll also see a resource list with suppliers and true costs. So what's next? How do we create and sustain a movement? The grant cycle ended, the funding expired on December 31st, but the work continues. So we're now exploring additional funding opportunities, particularly within the philanthropic community, where framing this work around climate resilience has opened up a host of new possibilities. But we're also asking, what partnerships can we build? How do we move this forward together as a community? As we scale, there may be opportunities to reduce costs through larger volume purchasing, shared resources. And even though the grant has ended, Northwest Food Alliance is committed to carrying this work forward. We're continuing to work with schools throughout this year. And if you're interested in learning more or continuing the conversation, please feel free to reach out. There is no obligation and no cost to start the discussion. There will be funding requirements eventually, but strong partnerships are what make that more achievable. And I'll just close by saying this has been an incredibly rewarding project. I've worked in this space for a long time, but seeing this level of student engagement and awareness and watching students really wake up to the importance of this work has been super powerful. The long-term benefits extend well beyond the school itself, reaching families and communities as well. And I think that's what has made this work so meaningful. So I want to thank you all, and we look forward to touching base with you if you're interested in pursuing this further.
So before we wrap this up, some thank yous are in order. On behalf of our team, thank you to everyone who came to the table, chose to say yes even when it wasn't the easy path, and helped to make this work possible. You've inspired us, and we are deeply grateful for your vision and leadership. Here are a few more people we'd like to thank. We also want to extend our appreciation to those who participated in our bulk milk learning cohort for their time, ideas, and engagement. All of the photos in this presentation that include students were provided and approved for publication by Federal Way Public Schools. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Take care.